Hello, Jakarta and the world. I'm Doug Johnson, and this is White Trash Talking. Today, this week, I want to look at the country of Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula, which has been in the news a lot lately, and at a group of Yemenis called the Houthis, or as they prefer, Ansar Allah. Yemen has existed for a couple thousand years and has a rich cultural history. Today I'm focusing mostly on events of the last decade, and particularly this last year, as the Houthis have joined the axis of resistance against Israel's genocide in Gaza and have leveraged their control of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Red Sea as a means to sanction countries allied with Israel and the US. This leverage also illustrates a form of blowback against the West, as well as the increasing effectiveness of asymmetrical warfare in a world that is interconnected more and more. I will consider the impact of this new kind of warfare on the US in regards to its role as global hegemon. Okay, so here's a map of the region of Yemen, the Arabian Peninsula, and you see at the bottom is I have Yemen circled. And here's a more focused map which shows the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. That's a 30-mile wide opening into the Red Sea, and this is a strategic choke point that the Houthis have been exploiting, which I'll talk about. And what's happening is that there's been a blockade of the Red Sea, and there's been disruption to global shipping, supplies, and oil by the Houthis. And this is in solidarity with the Gazans. They vowed to continue this blockade as long as it takes for Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza, stop the siege of Gaza. The blockade has been surprisingly effective. Okay, what's important about all of this that I'm going to talk about is it signals a new world that we're living in. To give context to the Houthi militancy around the Red Sea, it's important to have some understanding of their origins and events that have shaped their views and their motivations. For that, I'm relying on the excellent work of the Caspian Report, which provides graphic commentary on geopolitical events around the world. I found the Caspian Report on YouTube, but they are also on Twitter, Facebook, and elsewhere, and can be supported through Patreon. I will show a couple of their short clips. Here's one for you.
The Houthi movement has humble origins. Beginning its existence as a minor youth group in the early 1990s, it rapidly rose to prominence under the tutelage of its namesake, Hussein al-Houthi. Initially focused on Zayidi revivalism, which is one of the major branches of Shia Islam, the Houthis soon took on a more revolutionary character in response to the US invasion of Iraq. Before long, the group was questioning the legitimacy of the Yemeni state. In the 10 years that followed, Yemeni President Abdullah al-Saleh would attempt to crack down on the movement, driving the Houthis into the northern mountains. Squeezed between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, the Houthis began to move closer to other Shia factions in the Middle East, ultimately courting the support of Iran and its axis of resistance.
Okay, one quick point. The Houthis' revolutionary character, as it was called here, is a direct response to the US invasion of Iraq. That's true, and that means that the Houthi aggression against Israel and the US is blowback from earlier US aggression. By definition, it's blowback. Violence begets violence. I'm stating something obvious here, but it needs to be stated. This is what's going on. The sooner we learn this, the sooner we can live in a more peaceful world. So let's continue.
With the outbreak of the Yemeni revolution in 2011, local hostilities evolved into a front in the wider Iranian-Saudi proxy war. As the revolution collapsed into a civil war, the Houthis skillfully navigated Yemen's internal dynamics. They partnered with the then-deposed Saleh to take the capital Sana'a by February 2015. The Houthis deposed Saleh and took over the army. Overnight, the ragtag rebel movement came into possession of the military and demographic wealth of North Yemen. More importantly, however, the Houthis had broken out of their confinement and gained a coastline. Consequently, the group came to possess a valuable geopolitical position just across the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. At about 30 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, the Bab al-Mandeb is a vulnerable gateway for shipping and an opportunity for pirates, the ranks of which the Houthis rushed to join.
Okay, so this explains who the Houthis are, where they came from, and how they ended up controlling the coast and engaging in piracy. And it's important to understand that this is one of the poorest countries on the planet. The Houthis were subjected to violence as they were attempting to challenge the president whom they were unhappy with, much like the US engaged in a revolutionary war when they were unhappy with the leadership. So they rose up in a time of violence, and while I don't agree with the piracy, I just wanted to give some context. Okay, it continues.
Revenues from maritime-related activities and piracy remained high, surpassing $1.5 billion by 2020. The viability of the Houthis provoked fear in Riyadh, and in 2015, Saudi Arabia led a direct intervention in the conflict. Under the fog of war, the Houthi insurgency sustained itself and even advanced owing to the inflow of aid and materials from sponsors in Tehran and Beirut. Years of the Saudi-led air campaign had taught the Houthis the value of force dispersal and asymmetric warfare. By 2022, the growing fleet of explosive boats was complemented by the delivery of a host of anti-ship rockets from Iran. These include the 120-kilometer ranged Noor and the 200-kilometer ranged Qadir anti-ship missiles, as well as the 300-kilometer ranged Khalij Fars anti-ship ballistic missile. Loitering munitions such as the Samad 3 drone and the Tofan 3 blowfish have likewise gradually found their way into the Houthi arsenal.
Okay, so this is a documentary made for US mainstream consumption. They do a good job, but they whitewash the Saudi, I don't want to call it genocide because by definition it really isn't that, but it was such a horrendous massacre, and it was a US-sponsored massacre. The Yemenis endured 8 years of aerial bombardment by Saudi Arabia's US-supplied F-16s, which caused one of the worst humanitarian disasters of the world, and it resulted in 377,000 people dead, many indirectly by widespread famine, a cholera outbreak, and a lack of health services. Another 4.5 million people were displaced. The end result is the Houthis emerged as an experienced and battle-hardened militia allied with Iran and hostile to Western interest. Again, this is blowback. It's blowback on a couple of levels. Iran had endured the US overthrow of its president and then many, many years of brutal sanctions. And the Houthis had endured US-sponsored Saudi attacks that caused this humanitarian disaster. And they're both now allied against Israel and the US and US proxies. So this is, by definition, blowback. And, you know, again, it underscores the idea that violence leads to more violence. Okay, in response to the genocide in Gaza, the Houthis have taken a moral stand and are blockading ships destined to Israeli ports. This also includes any ships from countries allied with Israel and the US. The US responded with Operation Prosperity Guardian, which they were confident would resolve the problem of the Houthi blockade. And this is a White House press conference announcing the US's grand operation.
The Department of Defense announced Operation Prosperity Guardian and the formation of an international coalition of countries to counter these threats. Now, ships and aircraft from multiple nations are and will continue to join the United States in conducting maritime surveillance and taking defensive action as appropriate to protect commercial ships from the threat posed by the Houthis. And we've been able to bring together now a number of partners, including the United Kingdom, Bahrain, Canada, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Seychelles, Spain.
Okay, this coalition, this fearsome coalition, is composed of countries like the UK, that has literally one seafaring naval vessel, and I think it's in port being fixed. They do not have a military. Seychelles, come on, this is not much of a coalition. Let's continue.
And even more to address this challenge together. Also today, in a related fashion, the United States and the world's largest flag states for commercial vessels transiting the Red Sea also issued a joint statement condemning in the strongest terms the threats and the acts by the Houthis. This joint statement has 44 signatories.
Who is the U.S. who is aiding Israel in their genocide of Gazans? Who are they to condemn the actions of the Houthis? What the Houthis are doing doesn't compare one bit to genocide. The U.S. has lost all credibility as a moral judge and as a leader of the world. Let's continue.
Including NATO, the entire EU and G7, as well as Australia, Canada, Bahamas, Malta, New Zealand, Singapore, and Yemen. The Red Sea is a conduit for 10 to 15% of all global trade, 8% of global grain trade, and 12% of global seaborne oil trade. Of this total Red Sea trade, Greek, Chinese, Japanese, and German-owned vessels make up 40 to 50% of transits. All that underscores the dependence that these economies have around the world on the strategic trade. Bottom line is, these attacks have to stop. There's going to be a whole lot of hardware in the Red Sea now to counter these threats. So let's see where it goes.
There's going to be a whole lot of hardware in the Red Sea. Let's see where it goes. This guy is a fool. He's a fool. And why do I say that? Is because of this report. It's by the McKinsey Institute. This was a war game that the U.S. Pentagon sponsored to find out its preparedness to combat Iran. And now, the Yemen is not Iran, but as you will see, you can extrapolate from this report, this war game, to what's happening in Yemen. So let me show you. This article is by the McKinsey Institute. It's a $250 million war game and its shocking outcome. Okay, so at a cost of $250 million, Millennium Challenge 2002 was the largest and most expensive war game in Pentagon history. With over 13,500 participants, the U.S. government took over 2 years to design it. The exercise pitted Iran against the U.S. military. Washington intended to show how the U.S. military could defeat Iran with ease. Paul Van Riper, 3-star general and 41-year veteran of the Marine Corps, led Iranian forces in the war game. His mission was to take on the full force of the U.S. military, led by an aircraft carrier battle group and a large amphibious landing force in the Persian Gulf. The results shocked everyone. Van Riper waited for the U.S. Navy to pass through the shallow and narrow Strait of Hormuz, which made them sitting ducks for Iran's unconventional and asymmetric warfare techniques. The idea is to level the playing field against a superior enemy with swarms of explosive-laden suicide speedboats, low-flying planes carrying anti-ship missiles, naval mines, and land-based anti-ship ballistic missiles, among other low-cost but highly effective measures. In minutes, Van Riper emerged victorious over his superior opponent and sank all 19 ships. Had it been real life, 20,000 U.S. sailors and Marines would have died. The main lesson of the Millennium Challenge 2002 is that aircraft carriers, the biggest and most expensive ships ever built, wouldn't last a single day in combat against even a regional power like Iran. Russia and China would have an even easier time dispatching them. They are overpriced toys. Okay, so the reason I'm showing you this war game with Iran is because you can extrapolate from that to show what's actually happened in the Red Sea. And I want to go back to this map I showed you earlier. And you see the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and then you see above it the Strait of Hormuz, where Iran is. They're both around the same width. They both have checkpoints. They're both strategic seafaring lanes. And once U.S. vessels pass through these narrow openings, they're caught in basically a big lake, and they're vulnerable to all of the munitions that I just described. For this U.S. fool to stand up there and say there's going to be a whole lot of hardware in the sea, let's see how it goes. Well, the U.S. has not learned a lesson here. And this is why what has happened in the Red Sea is the U.S. tried, they went in with their naval force, and they had to retreat because with Iran's help, the Yemenis attacked with everything they had, unconventional asymmetrical warfare, and easily defeated the U.S. Navy to the point where they had to withdraw. The largest naval fleet in the world, the U.S. cannot defeat Yemen. This is a new world, and the U.S. needs to learn this lesson. All right, and now I want to look at some of the Yemen's asymmetrical tactics. And I assembled some footage from the internet, starting from some of their earlier work and building up to this past week, where they're now launching hypersonic missiles. But let's start from the beginning. Okay, that's the Houthis downing a U.S. Reaper drone. They've downed 13 of them so far. The Reaper drone cost $20 million, and the Houthis routinely down them. And this is the wreckage. This is the footage of the Houthis boarding a ship that's allied with Israel, perhaps headed to Israel.
On July 19th.
And this is footage of the Houthis. They modified a drone, and it flew all the way to Israel and hit its target.
A Houthi missile hit Tel Aviv, killing one person. The Houthis have never managed a successful strike on the city until now. The Houthis claim the drone, which hit Tel Aviv, is a new type of aircraft named Yafa that can fly undetected through Israel's extensive air defense systems. A key point here, according to the Israelis, is the drone had been modified. It carried less than 10 kilograms of explosives instead of its standard 18 kilograms, so was able to hold more fuel and fly for 500 kilometers longer than normal. It's put Yemen's neighbors and enemies on notice.
Okay, now the Yemen Houthis have stepped it up and they're attacking the airport, and this was the Israeli response.
Blood and wreckage at Sana'a airport stand testimony to the ferocity of Israel's latest strike on Yemen. Israel says it's just getting started in its war on the Houthis. In this latest raid, the Israeli army said it also targeted power stations and what it said was military infrastructure in 3 different ports. Local media reports say the Houthis are viewing this as a serious escalation.
It's a shame they didn't shake a hair on our heads. We're steadfast and resilient and do not fear America nor Israel. They're nothing but cardboard boxes, and between us and them is the battlefield.
The airport is a vital lifeline for embattled Yemen that's facing many crises and has a large United Nations presence. The Israeli strikes came a day after the Houthis, who control Sana'a and its Red Sea coast, fired a ballistic missile and 2 drones towards Israel. 16 people were wounded when a Houthi missile hit a playground in Tel Aviv.
And finally, I want to show footage from Electronic Intifada regarding this past week. And the Houthis are routinely sending hypersonic missiles now into Tel Aviv. Let's watch.
And a couple quick points from Yemen in the resistance report this week. We saw number 40 here is a pair of Palestine 2 ballistic missiles being fired. This is a missile with a 2,200 kilometer range that were launched. They've been launched daily over the last week or 10 days that set off alarms in Israel, had millions of Israelis running to the shelters every night for about the last 10 days. Here you see it again. There's the 2 arrows missing, and then here again you'll see the two arrows trying to get it, being penetrated. Pretty spectacular. And this one's even more obvious. The port is closed. The airport is closed. Travel to Israel is basically non-existent.
For Israel to stop this, they must end the genocide in Gaza. This is the reality they don't want to face. The U.S. and Israel must face this new reality in a world tightly connected by advanced technology, and the proliferation of weapons is ubiquitous. States no longer have a monopoly on power. Aggression towards others on this tiny planet is soon reflected back on the aggressors. The only way to enjoy peace is to engage peacefully with your neighbors. The days of U.S. empire are numbered. That's all I have to say. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like. Please subscribe. I'm just starting out, so I plan to grow and get better at this. And I'm working alone now, but perhaps someday soon I will have partners and we'll get a little more slick here. And so please join me. Be a subscriber. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.